Welcome once again to Arctic Fire. This unique gathering of swordsmiths explores the outer edge of the craft, where craftsmanship, artistry, storytelling, history, and myth combine. This year, the group has recreated objects found in the legendary Hoard of Grendel, from the most ancient surviving poem in Old English, Beowulf. 4 days of live broadcast, in which legends will be reborn. Arctic Fire 2016, Grendel's Hoard.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow sword geeks and bladesmiths, welcome back to Arctic Fire 2016. I have the honor to make the first individual presentation of a number you're going to see in the coming hours and days. Today I will talk about the searching for a hoard. And not just any hoard, it's the Hoard of Grendel, Grendel's Hoard. This project began at an end. And now I tell you, listen, because I'm about to tell you a story where the fantastic will be sitting nearby the everyday. We're going to venture into the land of the trolls, where you might not be able to trust your senses. So beware. There are trolls lurking here. You might have heard about the project we did in 2013, which was the making of an artifact. It was a riddle project with clues involved, and it was a fantastic experience. It was broadcast, and for those who watched, they could see clues being presented as to the identity of the object and where it was hidden. And Dave was contacted by a man who had seen this and was fascinated by this object. And the fact that we approach ideas of the artifact as a storytelling device and the thing of history, real and imagined. And he had in his possession some materials, some objects that he had got as an inheritance from a relative. And he thought that this may be of interest to us. So he wanted to remain anonymous. He is involved with internet security and doesn't want to reveal his name, so his identity shall remain hidden. He is, however, a relative to a lady, late lady Bente Lewis, born Christensen, who is the daughter of a man who's been the center of this story, a man called Gotthard Mörkvinter. This man, if you know about him, might be because he's come down to history as a traitor of his country. To what extent he was truly a traitor, we will not really know, but we do know that he was fascinated with the ideas of Germanic history and Norse myth, and he was very sympathetic to the movement in the early 20th century in Germany that developed into the Nazi terror. He was independently rich. At an early age, he came into a fortune that was created by his father, who was involved in the Danish colonies, first on the Gold Coast, on Africa, in Ghana, and then later on in the Danish West Indies. And on this rather impressive fortune, he could indulge himself in his history or his interest in history and archaeology. So he sponsored private excavations. He collected originals, both those who he was sort of secured by the excavations, but also bought into his collection. And he studied these and also studied Germanic myth, and he published material. This is, for example, pages from an article published in the periodical I Farfädrens spår, the year 1932. Eine ungewöhnliche Dolche der Eizenzeit. I'm not German speaking. This means a group of unusual daggers from the Iron Age. And here he presents a group of fascinating pieces that are not so widely known because they're difficult to classify. This one, for example, shows some similarities to daggers found in the Hjortspring find, one of the earliest bog finds in Nordic history from the sort of 350 BC. It has a blade shape that is very reminiscent of one of these daggers. However, it's much, much larger. It's almost in the size of being a short sword. So it's a massive piece. Very little remains of the hilt, but it has some interesting features. So make note, for example, of the lines in the blade and the way the hilt is attached. Another was found in the area southwest area of Germany, the Black Forest area, when a huge oak fell to the ground and under its roots revealed this dagger. This was near Schloss Hohendorf in southwest Germany. And what's interesting is that the hilt shows clear similarities to some Hallstatt period daggers. The scabbard is made of sheet metal with a punched decoration in the shape of a head, of a face. And from the carrying ring, there is a little silver chain whereupon is strong teeth, human teeth. So it's a rather grim piece. This one was found in the late 1920s during peat harvesting outside Rostock. And it was found together with a bundle of broken and scorched human bones. What was interesting with this dagger, and what caused quite some controversy, is the fact that the overall shape of it is very, very similar, again, to some of these Hallstatt daggers that are dated to around 600-700 BC. However, the pommel of this dagger is very, very similar. Well, it is unique to pommels of high medieval swords. And it's also of an unusual size. The width of it is 12 centimeters over the widest part of the blade. So it's a huge piece. Again, a remarkable and rather morbid find was in a grave of a knight, at least supposed knight, close to the Battle of Saule in Lithuania, where the order of the sword, the Swordbrethren, were soundly beaten by Samigallians in the year of 1237, if I remember correctly. So it's believed that this man may have been killed in the battle. We can't be sure of that, however. At his feet is there was remains of a casket or a chest of wood with iron bindings. Inside this were fragments of a very large skull. On top of the lid, there is this dagger or short sword, which is remarkable in that it has silver decorations on the scabbard, enhancing the features of a face. Again, the face is sort of part of it. And the rivet washers that attaches the blade to the guard is actually Roman silver coins. So again, we have this strange sort of anachronistic nature of these daggers. And this is one reason there aren't really any great interest for that in common academia. They are difficult to approach. Gotthard was also interested in the mythological part of this world at this time. And he, together with this publication of the daggers, he republished this drawing of a pressbleck. The The article occurred in the periodical Fornvännen in 1928, I think, and the author is Brage, Gunnar Brage. And Gotthard pointed out that the dagger that this figure is holding in her hand is very, very similar to those daggers of this group. And it's believed that this Prästblek is actually depicting one of the epic moments in the Beowulf poem, which is the fight between Beowulf and Grendel's mother. You can see Beowulf in his left hand is holding a sword that seems to be broken and obviously failed in its task, and his right hand he is impaling the mother with this oversized or huge sword. In the upper corner of the image is the torn off head of the henchman or advisor that Grendel's mother abducted from the hall. And in the other upper corner you can see a decapitated snake, which might be one of the sea monsters he sort of was fighting on the way down in the lake. You can also see what is very probably the torn off arm of Grendel that Grendel's mother secured from the hall and brought back with her. And this is one of the first rather peculiar coincidences of this journey I've been on ever since taking on the study of the objects of this hoard. This May, the English reenactment group or living history group of Wolfhedenas visited Uppsala and made a display in old Uppsala showing the pieces. And we also together did a visit in the storerooms of the archaeological collection of Uppsala University. They wanted to study the pieces from Grendel and Valsgärde, of obvious reasons. And together with Dave Roper, we went to look for good pieces to be reproduced and studied closer. And in one of the drawers where you have unidentified, sort of finds without a number, without a find location, lo and behold, we found what we believe is actually the original piece that is the piece that is depicted in this drawing. And this is quite remarkable. We notify the people who curate this collection, and there might be further publications of this. This is one of the nice spin-off effects of this one. Now I would like to come to a different part of this presentation, and that is the study of the troll, or troglodyology. This is a field of study that has a few centuries behind it, actually. When we talk about Norse myth, there's part of it that goes way back before the sagas of Thor and Odin and the Norse gods that we recognize, back into history that is silenced to us. We don't know the myths that were told and that occupy the imagination of the people of the Bronze Age. But we do have their images, sometimes. And these are rock carvings that show the sun. You see traces of journeys as footprints. You see religious ceremonies, and you sometimes see fighting. And in some of these images, you can gather that it's humans interacting with gods, or possibly trolls. And this was something that fascinated our Gotthard. We need to understand that the troll is an active figure in folklore up to very, very recent times, perhaps even today. And in folklore, the traditional role of the troll is that the troll is like, it's greedy, it lives in the wilderness, mountains, forests, as in case of Grendel and his mother, it's a lake. It abducts the innocent. It hoards silver and riches, and it has the ability to twist your mind. It can make you believe things that are not true. It can make you doubt what you take for granted, and it will lead you astray. And this was a strong element in folklore. And this is famously depicted in the illustrations of John Bauer. We have other impressions of the troll, however, being not so clearly sinister. There is a story retold by Alcuin, the famous scholar who was active at the court of Charlemagne in the 9th century. He was called to the court by Charlemagne when he already had a bit of career behind him. He had a rumor of being an eminent philosopher with very deep scholarly knowledge of philosophy. He was a very, very prominent teacher. So Charlemagne wanted him at his court to elevate the status and to teach his people. At this time, Alcuin tells us in a letter to the Bishop Arno of Salzburg, when he came to the court of Charlemagne, Charlemagne had received a gift from one of his vassals in Böhmen. The gift was nothing less than a troll in chains that was transported to the court in a cage. And there were scholars already at court who felt somewhat threatened by Alcuin's presence. They were envious of him, jealous. So some of them started to spread a rumor, we are told, that Alcuin, in his pride, said, "I can make a good Christian out of this troll." Of course, this was a great joke. The emperor, however, in his wisdom, he knew Alcuin, he is a man of knowledge. So he gives him the task officially, please convert this troll, make a Christian out of him. And Alcuin accepts and spends quite some time together with this troll in the dungeon and trying to educate him. And indeed, the troll picks up on Latin and rhetoric and dialectics, and Alcuin notes that after some time he's quite as skilled in these arts as many of the other scholars at court. However, the troll refuses to be baptized. He refuses to become Christian. And the joke grows lame after a while, and unfortunately the troll is put on the pyre and killed, despite Alcuin's prayers and interjections, please spare him. But the troll is dead, and Alcuin makes his famous statement that you can force a man to be baptized, but you cannot make him truly believe by threat of violence. And we commonly this is thought to have to do with the enforced Christianization of the Saxons. But indeed it has to do with this troll story. We also have the story, the troll present as this object of creature of terror, and the element of the troll cult in sort of appeasing the troll, and also perhaps using its power to scare away enemies, can be seen in these stelae, these almost like sculptures of figures. Normally these show heroes or gods or kings, but some of them are of a different nature, and you may recognize some similarities between them. This is a famous example from Poland, near Biskupin, thought to date from around the 2nd century AD. And you may note how it holds two human figures in its hands, and there is this wide-bladed dagger with a scabbard that bears a face. The second one is known as the Old Man at the Cross. It was destroyed during the Civil War in England. It was between the road from Salisbury down in Cornwall. It had, in folk belief, it had to do with the giving of promises and also some kind of fertility myth around it. The only thing we have to this day are this depiction of it. And finally, we have the top of a staff found in the bottom of a well in Dublin. The well dates to the Viking Age, and it may actually depict Grendel's mother. It's a she-troll. You can again see the dagger with the faced scabbard, and she's about to devour a human being. Quite grim. there are some famous scholars who looked into this area of research, and a preeminent one is Carl Linné, who made a journey to northern part of Sweden, Lapland, in the 1730s. He came back with a full shamanic equipment, with a drum and all the accoutrements, and made quite a success of this. Depicted beside it, you will see a rather unusual Noid or shaman drum that is said to be a battle drum to face trolls in spiritual battle. Depicts the Sami pantheon at the top, and you can see the faces of the moon and runes of power. So there is this connection between the Aboriginal or original population of Sweden as the Sami and the trolls. There is this, indeed, the scholar Jakob Fredrik Neikter in the late 18th and century, he wrote a story, a work called Gente Antiqua Troll, or the Ancient Troll Nation, where he talks about the trolls being the original population of Sweden that was pushed away by the more modern people. And he claims that these are actually the forefathers of the Sami nation. Gunnar Olof Hultén Cavallius is a later scholar who also studies this question, and he claims that witches, he doesn't at all refute their existence, and he claims they are actually descendants of trolls. This brings us back to the modern era, and again connects to Gotthard. There was a young man, Elias Mistelgren, who was a student, a follower of Herman Lundborg. And this is a very dark chapter in Swedish history. Herman Lundborg was the head of the State Institute for Racial Biology, and he was a strong proponent of eugenics, that is racial hygiene. And they were interested in classifying humans into races and putting them on a scale of varying sort of purity. And to do that, they studied proportions and the features of people, measuring them and classifying them accordingly. And these ideas, these very dark ideas, actually formed the basis of understanding also in the Third Reich in Germany, which is, well, the source of many of the nightmares of the 20th century. This is one of the instruments used by them for the measuring of people. Elias Mistelgren was also interested in the folklore of the Sami people, and he contacted Gotthard to fund his research trip to northern Sweden, northern Finland, and also into northwest Russia. And Gotthard, knowing that he could get some more material about these fascinating questions, he funded this trip, and there is a correspondence from Elias Mistelgren back to the university, Lundborg, and also to Gotthard. So we know a little bit of this trip and what happened. He came finally to a place, Svetoserdo, in northwest Russia, which is a lake, a holy lake for the Sami people. And there is a legend attached to it that has to do with the defeating of a magic-wielding giant by one of the sky gods who hurled the lightning and incinerated this thing. This place is taboo to come close to, but Elias approached a curiously shaped boulder. His guides refused to follow him. And underneath that boulder, he found a bundle of bones tucked away. And what he saw there astounded him. He made some first preliminary sketches and measurements. He sent one piece home together with a letter where he said, "I'm going to abort the rest of the mission, coming home as quickly as I can, securing these valuable bones, but just take this as a introduction of what I'm going to show you." So unfortunately, we only have his words and this first remain that he sent home, which was a claw, a bear-like claw, but much larger. There were conflicts in the group. His guides were not quite, well, they didn't like him. He wasn't treating them well. And he didn't make it back. We don't know why. He might have been taken by Russian border controls, or possibly he just went lost and perished in the wilderness, or some even more sinister fate came to him. We don't know today. We only know that he disappeared in 1939 on his way back. Following this trail, I checked the letters, the words given to us in the letters to Gotthard, and also in the archives of the university we have the correspondence of Lundborg preserved. So there was enough there to seek this remain, this proof that he sent home. And everything pointed at this being kept in the collection of the Museum of Evolutionary Biology in Uppsala. So I asked if I could go there and have a look, and I was welcomed. It is in a state of refurbishment, so what you meet is quite surrealistic. You have a museum where all the stuffed animals are in clusters and groups. They're like almost like you interrupt a conversation between them when you come into the room, and they just startled look at you, frozen. And in one corridor you have this haphazard meeting between a family of moose and a bison. A stuffed fish swinging on dry land, and you can, in the distance, you can glimpse a lion, which is actually a stuffed lion from the late 17th century. The guy who stuffed it had no idea what a lion looked like. And behind that lion, in a stack of shelves or drawers, indeed, there was the claw. And that was quite a charged moment when I could pick it up and examine it firsthand, and it looked nothing like anything of the other pieces, like the claws you saw on bears and stuff. And this, I think, have sparked again some new curiosity in this case. It's sort of the whole heritage left behind by Lundborg is sort of, it's uncomfortable to approach. So that's one reason why these things haven't really been looked into. But maybe it's time again to look at this from a new angle and try to classify this. Elias Mistelgren was convinced that he had found something that was quite remarkable, revolutionary. But quite what it was, no one has come forward and say what it is. We can only be left to guess. So, this brings me to Gotthard's involvement in the Hoard, finally. And the Hoard of Grendel, is also known as the treasure of Thursholt. Thursholt is believed to be a root of Thurse, or giant, and Holt is a word for small forest. So it's the village is named Giant's Forest. It is on Zealand, in Denmark, and quite close to Leire. It's a beautiful landscape. You can see it on the map here. It's just smack in the middle of Zealand. This area is filled with remains of really ancient times. You have Neolithic graves, you have tombs of the ancients, you have a lot of shallow lakes, and many of those were holy lakes used for offerings. You have beechwood forests, and you have the undulating hills. It's a rich, beautiful farming land, and these fantastic features. On top of this very hill is actually where they quite recently made excavations and found what might very well be the Hall Herod. It's a hall from the 6th century of huge dimensions that fits very well to the descriptions of the poem. So if you were coming with the warband together with Beowulf walking up the hill, you can imagine a huge hall almost in the shape of a state church, but much longer, with this high roof decorated with the antlers And this must have been an awesome sight, dominating the landscape. In the year of 1848, a young man called Torben Sørensen runs away from home. He's 50 years old, and he's about to enlist in the war against Germany. His father is a landless farmhand, poor conditions, but he's determined to strike out and try to make his luck. As it happens to be, he passes a place just behind the forest that shields him from the village of Tursholt, and he comes upon a sinkhole in the limestone hill beside a field. This field has come down in local knowledge as the field of bones, because in this time you needed more farmland. So the wetlands, the bogs and the shallow lakes, they were ditched, and the water was led away, and either it was used for peat harvesting or actual grazing or farmland. And this turned out to be, the field of bone turned out to be an unusually fertile field. However, by every spring, when the thaw was breaking, bones were pushed up to the surface. And quite a few of these were human bones. And because of that, it came to have a rather sinister reputation, this place. There was a series of summers with very little rain, which lowered the water table further, even after the ditching. And then a summer of great deluge and a very wet spring, the wet spring of 1848. And it's believed that this shifting of the water table up and down sort of provoked further erosion of the limestone, which made the sinkhole open up. So Torben Sørensen, you can see him here as a middle-aged man, a little bit later in his life, after a series of adventures. He's a slim 15-year-old. He crawls down the hole and comes upon a system of channels, tunnels, and caves. And under the caved-in roof in one of these, he finds astounding artifacts. So he gathers as many as he dares and crawls back up and returns, but he can feel in a interview with him in the early 1900s to celebrate his 80th birthday, he tells about this childhood adventure. He didn't dare to go down too many times because there was this danger of the roof caving in on him. But he has at least an armful of these objects. He cleans himself in a nearby little pond and hides his find in a hazel bush. And he knows that the priest in Thursholt, Ulrik Tygesen Friis, is interested in ancient things and is a collector. He's an entomologist and is most famous for his study of a certain type of beetle. He has even one named after him. I don't know about those things, but he is. If you're an entomologist, chances are you know about the work of Friis. However, he was also, like Gotthard later, very interested in ancient stuff. And this is a time in Denmark history when, because of the peat harvesting, you start to find the bog offerings. You start to see the great war booties. They are starting to surface again. So Ulrik Tygesen Friis, he was quite enthusiastic when this young man told about his find, and he buys the object for just very cheap. It was like coffee money, almost. However, the young man Torben, he's quite happy. He stops his plan of going to the army, and instead he takes to the sea, becoming shipmate, working with, what's the word, when you shovel coal for the steamers. And because of that experience, he later becomes an engineer at the Royal Danish Railroads. So he makes quite a journey through his life. But what is interesting for us now is the work done by Ulrik Tygesen Friis, because, oh, sorry, the wrong way. Because of his taking these objects in custody, we know about them today. Because he depicted them. In many cases, the objects are lost to us today. Some of them are saved just because Gotthard managed to buy them back from the collectors that bought them from the priest Tygesen Friis. But we do have the drawings. These were made both for his own interest, but also in correspondence with collectors around Europe to show what he had and to negotiate prices. So it's thought that he made quite a bit of a private fortune selling these objects. The comb he kept for himself, and it can be seen in the local museum of the local historical cultural museum of Turesholt. So if you happen to have the way by, make sure you look it up on a map to secure a visit in Turesholt. It's a nice little place. It has one of those unusual round churches, which are typical for the 12th century. We can also see the spear, which unusual because it has the rivet blocks are in the shape of animals, in this case wolves. But only one wolf survived. And this might have some significance in identifying the finds that Linnaeus talks about in his journey to Gotland. He didn't only go to Lapland, he also visited Gotland in the year 1741. And he comes across a local legend which has proof, material proof, in a treasure. And Linnaeus makes some drawings and makes some notes about these objects. And one of the things he notes is a brooch in the shape of a wolf that has a hole through its back. So he speculates that it might be a repurposed object that has been gilded and made into a brooch. There are shield bosses, there are remains of metal mounts for horns of cattle. There is a gold treasure in the form of Roman solidi, that is Roman military coins. An extremely rich find. And already Linnaeus remarks that since it comes from Rune, which is mentioned in the poem, or almost similar, this might actually be the burial of Beowulf. It comes from a local mound that was leveled. The material in the mound was used for landfill, which was often the case at this time. And the treasure that was found during these excavations, it was kept locally, but later on, there's no trace of it today, unfortunately. But we have the description and some drawings made by Linnaeus, and Gotthard remarked on those. Of course, he also knew about that journey. The famed lyre and a very unusual sword was part of the hoard as well. This belonged to a banker in Zürich who refused, not Zürich, Dresden, who refused to sell them to Gotthard. He could buy the drawings, but the object remained in Dresden and was lost to us in the firestorm during the war. But we do have the drawings. And finally, the knife that became the topic of my reconstruction. This came from a diamond merchant in Holland. Let's see if I remember his name. Oh, no, sorry, it's lost on me. Anyhow, the diamond merchant was only happy to sell this to Gotthard, and this is one of the objects we still have today. Unfortunately, the original is very, very deteriorated in rust. We can't handle it. Our anonymous benefactor showed it to us, so that was really helpful in analyzing the drawing and understanding what it was that Ulrik Tygesen Friis saw. Today, the dagger doesn't look like this at all. There's hardly any remains of the organic material, but the good thing is that the material in the blade is more exposed. You can see the grooves, the patterns in the blade, which is quite similar to one of the earlier daggers I showed with those tooth grooves that is similar to the Hjortspring find daggers. So this was the basis for my study. It's a close-up of the dagger, and this is the final reconstruction, or almost completed. One interesting element in the dagger is the pommel, which has a rather elaborate silver decoration. And this was remarked on already by Gotthard, saying that it really looks like some Roman silverware in style. And indeed, there are Roman objects of very similar nature. And these are the fastenings for sword baldricks in the 3rd or 4th century. The spatha was slung from a shoulder baldric, and the leather strap on the backside was secured with one of these, like a big cufflink onto that baldric. And they often have these cut-out patterns. In a very recent excavation, this was beyond the knowledge of Gotthard. In 2008, in southwest Germany, in the Black Forest area again, in the area it's a Roman army camp en route. It's not a permanent camp, but one of those temporary camps. They found indeed a falera, which happens to be of the exact same design as the one depicted by Gotthard Fries back in 1848. So we can be quite certain that the assumption that it's actually a Roman piece silver is true. So this brings us back to the case of the dagger itself, with the peculiar leather cover, where you can see, also compared to the other daggers, where you have the face of that on that broad scabbard. And it was speculated that this might actually be some kind of trophy where a defeated enemy was carried like a mark of victory on the scabbard. So a theory forwarded by Gotthard is that this is like a kind of scalping tradition, that it's the flayed skin of an opponent made to be the leather of the scabbard. And this is already forwarded in his article about those unusual daggers, and it was reinforced when he acquired the dagger from Amsterdam, or Tursholt. He speculated that this may well be human skin. So that's why I chose to do it like this, based on the drawing and the knowledge that it might indeed be human skin. And with this, I would like to conclude by also concluding the story of Gotthard. It's known that, it's suspected that he sold secrets to the Germans before the invasion. He was sympathizing with their ideology, but towards the end of his life, during the occupation of Denmark, he grew increasingly bitter of the brutality of the Germans and the lack of enthusiasm for the cause, the Aryan cause of his national fellows. And he gradually sank into some kind of depression. He wrote in his diary, just a few months before his death, "I wanted to honor the heroes from ancient times. Like them crush weak indecision and vanquish filth and degeneration. Beowulf inspired me, but now I see how I was a slave to Grendel all this time. I came to own weapons and heirlooms of kings. It's a hoard from legend, but now I know that in the darkness the troll is leering at me." So he was clearly not in a good state. And indeed, a couple of months later, he was found in his study having shot himself. The collection came into the ownership of his daughter, Bente Lewis, who emigrated to the States after the war, married a real estate agent in New York. From her descendant, we learned that she had a rather miserable life, unfortunately. The treasure, the hoard, came into his possession when she died, and that concludes the circle and how we came upon the treasure, the fabled treasure of Tursholt. And I will make this material available on the Arctic Fire site. If you go to arcticfire.org and you will find a banner there where you can also click the truth. And under that, you will see all the additional information you would like to know about this. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and wish you happy adventures.